Hey class, in this video we're going to go over our new topic, which is the web unit. So we'll take a quick look at the schedule and then the unit itself. And then we'll talk a little bit about the internet. So we'll just do a kind of lecture, a little bit of history, and talk a little bit about the technologies behind the internet. So I think this should be a fun unit for everyone. This is a little bit different than our previous 3 units where we were creating media. In this unit, we're going to be creating a website. So obviously, most of the stuff we do these days happens on the internet. And so we're going to learn a little bit about the technologies that make all of that work. So let's take a look at the schedule first. I'm just going to go over to the Open Lab and we'll go down to schedule. And let's see, we are in week 10. So we're going to talk about the web here. This week we're also going to learn some HTML and learn how to publish a website on a platform called GitHub, which you may have heard of. And we'll just link to that website in a blog post. Next week, we are going to learn CSS, which is another web language. HTML and CSS are sort of the 2 web languages that we are going to learn. And we're just going to do a quick, brief overview. We're not really going to learn the languages per se, but we're going to learn a little bit. And we'll work on creating sort of a choose your own adventure website. And then in the last week of our web project, week 12, we'll go over how to embed media like images and videos into the website, and we'll finish our choose your own adventure project. The choose your own adventure project, well, actually, let's go to the web unit and we'll take a look at that. So again, it's just a 3-week little, kind of mini unit. As with all of our other units in this course, we're taking these kind of like quick, brief dives into these different aspects of creating multimedia. And this is our second to last unit. We have a 3D modeling unit that we'll work on in the last couple weeks of the semester. So let's take a look at our web unit page. So we're going to be learning HTML and CSS. We're going to be using a text editor called Sublime Text. I'll go over what that means in the next video. And we'll be using GitHub, a publishing platform, to publish our website. There's just some resources here for some different things about how the internet works, which you're encouraged to check out on your own time. There's some tutorials on HTML and CSS on a website called Don't Fear the Internet, which is kind of starting from scratch and creating a website. So that's a good resource if you want to learn a little bit more beyond what I'm going to cover in the video, which is going to be, or in our lessons, which will really be pretty basic just because these languages are quite robust. HTML basics on Mozilla Developers Network and CSS on Mozilla Developers Network. We'll take a look at those in our HTML and CSS lessons. We're going to make a small web page as our project, so it's going to be a choose your own adventure story. You can make it we're going to do it in the demo. I'm going to do just the basics. You're going to elaborate on it. It has to be at least 5 pages, but of course you can make it longer if you would like. There's some basic HTML elements we're going to use. I'm sure you guys will be fine with those. And yeah, if we use images, of course, use Creative Commons or public domain images, and we'll do some CSS. And then just like in our other projects, we'll create Open Lab posts with documentation of our project and our progress. For this one, it'll be a little bit different because we're not creating media, we're creating a website. But we can still take images of the website and create documentation of the website itself. So we'll talk about how to do that in our demo lessons. So that's a little bit of an overview. We'll go into more detail on all of these things as we go through this unit. But in this video, I just want to talk a little bit about how the internet works, and talk about some basic terms that we use when we're talking about the internet. So if we look at the rundown, just want to talk about a little bit of website history, web history, talk about a few important concepts. We'll look at kind of how the web has evolved. We'll look at the languages that power the web, and we'll talk about a couple more concepts here. So let's go ahead and look at the first website because I think that's always fun for people. So if we go to first website, www, we can see the first website ever created right here, World Wide Web. And so the version of the internet that we all use every day, that you're probably on right now as you're watching this video, that we use on the Open Lab, everything that is on sort of the World Wide Web is kind of the main sort of internet that we use. And when we use the word internet, what we're really referring to is the World Wide Web. The internet is sort of like the specific internet, but internet is a more general term, and there are other versions or other existing internets. And there were internets that existed previous to the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web is very special because it was sort of created to be an open source and open access protocol. And it was originally designed really as more of a sort of like publishing and research tool, which is why if we look at this website, it's very bare bones. There's no colors, there's no animations, there's no shopping cart, there's none of the stuff that we're used to on the web today. There's text and there's links, and that's basically the idea. So the idea was that researchers and academics and other people could use the internet in the form of the World Wide Web as a public forum to share information, and that would make research and other academic pursuits a lot easier. And people could also make their own personal websites, have hobby websites, make art, publish different things. But in the very beginning of the internet, when this website was first published in 1991, this was all that we had, was links and text. And one of the cool things about the way that the internet works, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see this, is everything that's published on the web is open source. So that means if I go into Chrome and I go to View, and I go down here to this developer drop-down menu. This won't look exactly the same in other browsers. So you could do this in other browsers, but it may not be the exact same set of menus. But if we go to View Source, we can actually see the HTML that powers this website. So you can see the title of the website, the World Wide Web Project, which matches the title that we see here in this tab. We can see the header on the website, which is this big World Wide Web header here. And then we can see the links. So there's a link to the summary, there's a link to policy. We can see where these links go. And if we click on these links, it takes us to different pages collected on this website. So this is actually explaining what a link is. This is explaining what hypertext is. And we can look at that. Hypertext is text which is not constrained to be linear. So that means that inside the text, we have links to other parts of the text. That can be within the same website, to other websites in the same document. And this is really powerful because it allows us to connect documents across the world and make information very easy to organize and share with people. So that's the basic idea of the web. As I mentioned, the World Wide Web is just one version of the internet, which sort of became the public internet that we all use now. But there have been internets for a long time before that. And one of the more famous ones, there's lots of ones that we could talk about, but a good one to look at is the ARPANET. So the ARPANET was a internet that was built in the US through research and government funding. And there's different reasons why the ARPANET existed, but one of the main reasons, let's look at the Wikipedia page for the ARPANET. So here we can see kind of a map of the ARPANET, and then there's also, you can see like a map on top of the US map. And what these nodes represent are different like data servers, so different connections between servers at different institutions. And so you can see there's Stanford on here, there's UCSD, UCLA. It's a lot of academic campuses, but there's also corporations. Xerox is on here. And then there's also government entities like ARPA, and other places. So this version of the internet was used, one of the main reasons they built it was to distribute government information like military secrets and things like that across the U.S. This was during the Cold War, and one of the sort of concerns was that if a central city like Washington D.C. or New York got bombed by the Soviets or whatever, we would lose all of the valuable information there. And so we needed a quick way to spread information across the country to secure our data and to secure our plans and things like that. And so the internet has this really interesting history. We're not going to go into lots and lots of details, but it sort of is built in this partnership between the government, between technology companies like Xerox and the phone company and other places like that, and then academic institutions that are doing research and building a lot of these systems. So let's talk about what the internet what's really great about the internet in terms of the fact that it's decentralized. So I'm going to make a little drawing to kind of explain what that means. So in traditional technology, communications technology, we have what's called centralized technology centers. So, for example, phone technology is centralized, and TV technology is centralized. So, for example, if you're watching TV, or at least if you were watching, before, now TV is really on the internet, but back in the day, if you were watching cable TV or network TV, there would be a sort of a central TV studio or company. It might be like ABC or CBS or Fox, whatever. And these companies would broadcast out the news or television programming, whatever it is. So they're kind of sending a signal out, and then we as users, we have TVs at home, and we can receive the signal, but we can't send anything back. So we can watch TV, we can see what they have to say on the news. If we want to comment on that or interact with that, we could write them a letter or call them or something like that. But the flow of information is centralized. It starts in a central sort of like authority, like a company or radio station, any type of institution that's broadcasting information, and then we receive that information. So there's not a back and forth. It's sort of like a top-down version of information, and all the sort of legacy media works this way. If we're talking about newspapers like the New York Times, there are people who work at the New York Times who write the articles, who produce the newspaper, and then it's distributed across the readership. And you might write in a letter to the editor or something like that, but you don't have access to the technology that creates the newspaper. So the central sort of authority decides what goes in the news, what information is valuable, what information is important to the world, and we as consumers, we just receive whatever that happens to be. And so a lot of legacy media works this way, and because publishing and technology, publishing used to be very burdensome. You had to have a lot of money to make newspapers, to buy paper and ink, and pay for distributors, to pay for trucks to drive the newspaper around, all those things. And so, for various reasons, that's why we had mostly centralized communications. So decentralized communication is what the internet allows us to do. So if you have a computer and you're connected to a network, you can broadcast whatever you want on the network. So if you've ever published on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or any of these other platforms, you can create content on your own very easily, very cheaply, and you can broadcast it to the entire world. The entire world might not be listening, but it's possible to do it. And now, with this technology, it's so much easier and cheaper for an individual person or a small organization to publish their own information. They can, communicate across the network. So if you have your computer here and then somebody else has their computer over here, we can talk to each other directly. Often we talk through platforms or through services. So you might have like Facebook over here. I might post something on Facebook and you might go and read Facebook. But we're still on a network. We still send and receive information from these sort of more centralized platforms. There's a lot of other things going on in there, but that's kind of the basic idea. On a network, anyone can share information or read information. And that's why it was really valuable for researchers and for government institutions to be able to share information quickly across a network. All right, so how does that happen? So one of the things that we had to do to create the internet was figure out how to do the communication. So before when we had just radio and TV and telephone communication, we had different ways of sending a signal from one place to another. So you could send it with radio waves, you could send it through a telephone line, and you could send it in different ways, but you had to have people involved and you had to have the right technology involved. So if you were a radio station, you needed a giant antenna and you needed to broadcast, and then people needed to have special radios to receive that broadcast. And the signal in between was just data. So there's a person over here, recording and sending the data out, and then there's a person over here that's tuning the dial and using the technology. So to make the internet work, we need to have computers and technology that can talk to each other. So rather than having people on either end of these signals, we have computers. And so to do that, we needed to come up with what's called protocols. So we use different protocols where one computer knows how to encode the data and send it to another computer, and that computer can decode the data. So a couple of protocols that we use are file transfer protocol. This is what we use to publish data on the web. And we'll sort of use this. We don't really use this as directly as we used to, but we'll use this when we use GitHub. HTTP is hypertext transfer protocol. So file transfer protocol is for files. HTTP is for websites, so the HTML and the data in the website. So that's why if you go to a website, you will see they don't show it anymore. They kind of hide it. But if we expose this entire web address, it always starts with HTTP or HTTPS, which is secure hypertext protocol. Okay, so that's how we share data across the web. We looked at the first website, and so let's talk a little bit about sort of how the internet looked when it first came out and in the 90s. You may have heard of GeoCities websites. This is a really good example of like what kind of websites looked like in the 90s. This was before we had really sophisticated web technologies like Facebook and social networks, as well as like a lot of online shopping and things like that. So we can look at this GeoCities gallery and we can kind of see what websites used to look like. So at first, we really just had text and links, but then they started to add some basic stuff like images. You could put little images, animated GIFs. This is a website about Area 51, which if you're not familiar is like a, where people think aliens landed. And so there's the other thing about decentralized information is you can publish whatever you want. So you see a lot of stuff that you might not otherwise see on the news or on TV. But you kind of get a sense of what these websites used to look like. There's very basic graphics, short animations, sort of this default text, lots of links, and little background images. There's this sort of aesthetic associated with the 90s internet that a lot of people are very nostalgic for. Some people, you may not have been alive in the 90s, so you may not really care, but you might recognize the aesthetics, through other things. But that's sort of what we had with what's called Web 1.0. And GeoCities is just one example, but lots of people have websites. To go on a personal tangent, that's when I really started getting interested in technology. I was, very young in the 90s, but I was really excited about the internet. And one of my big hobbies, I basically learned how to program because I wanted to publish comics that I used to draw on my computer. I wanted to make a website and publish my comics. And my comics were mostly about like soccer and stuff that I was interested in as a kid, and didn't, turn into anything. It was just a hobby that I enjoyed, but I learned how to, that was really where I first got interested in programming and technology in the first place, is I thought it was really cool to make a website and to be able to send it to my friends and do other stuff like that. So I started, publishing my drawings and figuring out how to hack together a goofy little website, and that's kind of how I got my start. Anyway, once the internet got really popular, of course, what people really wanted to do with it is a couple things that lead eventually to Web 2.0. One of those things is commerce, and the other one is social media. So Web 2.0 sort of starts in maybe 1999, maybe 2001. Kind of depends on when you want to define it, but it really comes into its like full form when we have Facebook in the mid 2000s and Amazon in the early 2000s, but really getting used more and more into the 2000s. So Facebook, of course, was social media. You could communicate with people, you could post things, you had a page, you could do all this stuff. So before Facebook and before those types of social media websites, if you wanted to have a website like this beautiful GeoCities website or like my old comics website, you had to be able to make a website using HTML and CSS. HTML and CSS is designed to be very easy to learn, and we're going to learn that in the next few weeks. But there's still a bit of a barrier to entry, and publishing also was very hard. I remember like spending hours and hours trying to figure out how to actually get my website online. So there is still this barrier to entry for the average person, even though the web is designed to be used by anyone. So Facebook and MySpace and Friendster and a lot of the early social media websites took out that issue. They made it so that you could create an account on a website and publish whatever you wanted. You guys probably have never heard of Friendster, so let's take a look at. It looks like Friendster still exists. I think this was the first social network that I was on. There's also LiveJournal. You guys might have heard about LiveJournal. Anyway, all these websites, the basic idea was instead of having to know HTML and CSS, you could go on the website, type, content into their CMS or content management system, and then post it, and other people could see it. You could follow people or make friends or message with people. And so that was sort of like the social aspect of it. The other, of course, was Amazon. If we look at Amazon, let's see, Amazon homepage, and maybe see some images of Amazon through the years. Yeah, so you can see the first Amazon website looks like this. Looks a lot like the first worldwide website. But the thing that Amazon did, and of course there were other e-commerce websites, but Amazon is kind of the main one that we associate with this, is they made it possible to buy things online. So before, the internet was mostly just about publishing information. It wasn't about commerce. Amazon and other early e-commerce websites kind of changed that. And, obviously it was so much easier to make a website than it is to make like a catalog or to have a store in a shopping center or something like that. So you're able to access a lot of customers that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. So that's really what defined Web 2.0, was commerce and social networking. And that kind of grew and grew and grew. Obviously, the iPhone comes out in like 2007, and the decade following that, we see a lot of advances in terms of all of those things. Like Twitter becomes really popular. YouTube comes out in 2006, but really starts to grow huge in the 2010s. And the 2010s, we just see this huge growth in terms of social media, publishing online, and e-commerce, and everything starts to kind of move online. The more recent, like in the last 5 years, you may remember in 2020, there was a lot of talk about Web3, which is sort of newer web-based technologies like blockchain, the metaverse, things like NFTs. There was this idea that those were going to kind of take over the internet. So, Facebook rebranded as Meta. A lot of people were interested in NFT art and blockchain, based assets like cryptocurrency and stuff like that. Obviously, those things are all still around, but it hasn't really replaced the internet. So we never really moved to Web3. It's unclear if we ever will, or if some other thing will come around. But that was sort of what people were pushing for a few years, was going from Web 2.0 to Web 3. but it hasn't really taken on, even though these technologies still exist. Most of the time you're on the internet, you're still on HTTP. You're still using all the stuff that we've been using the whole time. So let's talk about those technologies a little bit. These technologies, were built in the 90s or before the 90s, but really adopted in the 90s, and have become these really, really important technologies because they're the backbone of everything that we do every day on our phones and our computers and the way we interact with people. So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, those are the three main languages that you can use on a website in a browser. These do three sort of different things. So for HTML, this stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And so hypertext is those links that we talked about earlier. Markup is just means that we're formatting content. So HTML is not really coding per se. It doesn't. We're not like programming the computer. We're really just formatting content, and the browser is displaying the content. So that's why we call it markup rather than like a programming language. And then it's a language. So HTML is for content, and so it's where we put all the text, links, and media on a website. And that's what we're going to work on this week. We'll just do some really basic HTML and make a really simple website. The next language is CSS. This stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Cascading. I don't know if I spelled that right, but it looks fine. Cascading Style Sheets. The cascading part I will explain when we talk about CSS next week. We're not going to talk about it right now. Style is the important part. CSS is how we add color, layout, typography, all the different visual components to a website. And we'll learn a little bit of it next week. And then finally, we have JavaScript. We're not going to touch on JavaScript in this course. There are other courses that you could take at BMCC where you would learn JavaScript. So if you're interested in those, let me know. JavaScript is a programming language that kind of got added on to the web, added onto browsers and things like that in the mid 90s. And it was really added on once we realized that the web, wasn't taking advantage of all the things it could. You couldn't like publish video games. You couldn't publish interactive animations. So JavaScript really adds functionality. And it's the thing that really powers all the sort of interactions you have with a website. So that could be anything like shopping, social media, all those kind of things are mostly powered by JavaScript. And JavaScript, because of that, because the web is so popular, it's become one of the most popular, if not the most popular programming language in the world. And so we're not going to cover that in this class. As I said, if it's something that you're interested in, we do cover it in other classes. So let me know if that's something that you'd like to explore more. Okay, so we're almost done. Last thing to kind of talk about is back end versus front end. So we're only going to be doing front end in this course. If you've heard those terms before, you may know a little bit about how websites are built. Those terms used to kind of really have like a quite stark divide between them, but they're kind of more integrated these days as web technologies have gotten sort of more popular, and there's lots of different versions of the way that we make websites. Those things are not as distinct as they used to be. But what they basically mean is when you're looking at a website and the way all this stuff kind of fits together, we have things called clients. So clients are any computer, so like your laptop. This is a really bad drawing of a laptop. Your phone, it's just a square. Your desktop computer with your little mouse. All of these things are clients. So they are things that are being used by consumers or people or anybody who's using the internet. Clients don't normally talk to each other directly. They can in some circumstances, but that's not typically how they work. What usually happens is we have things called servers. Servers are computers that are not being operated by people. They're programmed by people to, do stuff, but then we just leave them alone and they kind of act on their own. So most websites are hosted on servers. If I want to go to a website, I might type in an address, a URL. Oh, I don't have a URL in here. I should have that somewhere, URL. So a web address is a URL, or a uniform resource locator. If I type in a URL, like let's say I want to go to NewYorkTimes.com, this is going to get routed through a web service provider like Verizon or Spectrum or whatever. So this will go through your ISP, and it will look for the address New York Times, and it'll find this server. There's lots of them. There's not just one. The New York Times is a big website. It gets accessed tons of times every single day. So they probably have hundreds or thousands of these servers. The server will look up the exact information that you're looking for. So it's like, I want this little article. It's going to package everything together in our HTTP protocol, and it's going to send it back to the client. That's why when you load a website, it doesn't just like appear instantly. It's not on your computer. It's not like nearby. It's on a server somewhere. So it happens fast, but your computer sends out a message. It says, I want, the headlines of today's newspaper. It goes to a server, which finds what you're looking for, and it sends it all back in a nice little package. And then the browser renders it out on the page. So when you're building a website, there's basically two types of programs. One is a front end. Front end is the programs that render or display the information on our computer. And that's all we're really going to be worried about, is creating the front end content of our website. Back end are these programs that look for the content and package it together and send it back to the client. We're not going to be doing this. You may do that in some later classes. That programming is a little bit more complex. It's mostly handled by computer science people. The front end side of things is handled by a lot more people, because it's not easier per se, but it's more geared towards publishing and information. And so there's more people who are kind of able to do that and interested in doing that. The back end, there's one program, on the server that's kind of handling all this stuff. So you don't need lots of different back ends, the way that you have lots of different content that you might display. All right, so that's our basic breakdown. We've covered a lot of terms. There's tons more, obviously, we could talk about when it comes to the internet. It's a very robust topic, but we will stop here. And in the next video, we'll actually build a really simple website, kind of like the one we saw earlier, and we'll publish it publicly on the web. So you'll be able to write whatever you want on the website, and send it to your friends, send it to your family members, and we'll document that and put it on OpenLab. So see you guys in that video, and we will learn some HTML.